Hello, and welcome to A New Way Forward, Reimagining the Nonprofit Workplace Virtual Engagement Series, presented by Council Michigan Foundations, Michigan Nonprofit Association, Michigan Community Resources, and COAC Detroit. This engaging and interactive multi-part series is designed to provide guidance to nonprofits throughout Michigan as you consider re-entry into the workplace. Sessions are grounded in equity and designed to balance the exploration of legal, HR, and financial requirements, as well as ways to strengthen team culture, redefine the workspace, and realign to mission. Today's session is leveraging technology and tips for taking the workplace virtual. I'm Kelly Kuhn, Vice President of Michigan Nonprofit Association, and I will serve as your host and moderator. Before we begin, we want to express our appreciation to anyone returning from our past sessions, as well as extend a warm welcome to those joining us for the first time. Our agenda for the day, we've got a great session planned and are excited to hear from our presenters who will offer practical tips and cover legal concerns for taking the workplace virtual, as well as highlight ways nonprofits have leveraged technology to continue to meet the needs of those they serve. A few housekeeping issues before we begin. This webinar is being recorded. The recording and slides will be shared afterward. As you know, the information around COVID-19 is moving at a rapid pace, and the situation is ever changing. We are all doing our best to understand and apply what we can. This context is important to express as we begin today, as our presenters plan to share guidance, which should not be construed as legal or financial advice. We have built in time for questions and answers after the presenters complete their content. All participants are muted, so please use the chat function to ask your questions. Not only do we want you to use the chat function for your questions, we would also encourage you to follow it throughout the presentation for helpful tips, links, and to complete a survey on this session before you exit. Also, we're implementing a new function today for the first time, and after the session, we are going to open what we call a lobby. You don't need to do anything, you just stay on the webinar, but it's a chance for you to actually connect with and share more informally with other participants. There will not be any formal programming, but rather just giving space for people to make connections. Please consider it as an option when we've completed the presentation. Today's session is number 4 in our series, and we'll focus on leveraging technology and tips for making the workplace virtual. Our past sessions began with a robust conversation around reimagining the nonprofit workplace with special guest Governor Whitmer, followed by a session on legal guidance for safely returning to the workplace, and a session that talked about creative design solutions for reentry, as well as our most recent session where we presented some great information on HR policies, procedures, and practices. These slides and webinar recordings are available on each of the presenting organizations' website. Now, to introduce our first presenters. Joseph Morrison and Jack Carver. This dynamic duo are with the Bodman attorneys and counselors. Introducing Joe first, Joe represents early and high growth companies in an outside general counsel capacity. He focuses on technology-enabled emerging companies and venture capital firms that invest in them. He has experience in a wide range of legal matters, including company formation, financing, operational concerns related to contracting, intellectual property matters, and employment issues. Before joining Bodman, Joe worked for Accenture as an information technology consultant in Washington, D.C. He also served as a corporate counsel and consulting manager for a Michigan-based IT consultancy, where he helped scale the company to 50+ employees and $3 million in revenue. Jack Carver represents clients in a variety of general business transactions and in matters involving corporate governance, commercial contractual issues, mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, and debt and equity financing. Prior to joining Bodman, Jack served as general counsel to a 1,200-employee Detroit technology company, where he was responsible for implementing business-friendly legal solutions in line with the company's strategic mission and overseeing all efforts relating to the corporate governance, strategic investments and partnerships, risk management, and general business operations. Please welcome Joe and Jack. I think you might be muted still.
Oh, sorry about that. Kelly, do you want to dive in on slide 1 and then we can we can kick off the legal focus portion of the presentation. So Jack and I will be doing a high-level review of some of the legal concerns around remote work and information and IT security more generally, and then a bit of application to how some of these concerns and data privacy and IT regimes will impact your workforce. The understanding that it's a pretty complex area. So we'll do, hopefully do a little bit of work orienting you to the space, and then a bit of a 101 on how we see a lot of clients apply these concerns and considerations to their IT contracting or their internal HR processes. So Jack, do you want to dive in?
Yeah. So this first slide, we kind of just went through some of the common issues that are being presented as more and more people work remotely. This is kind of a brave new world for everyone. Joe and I are some of the few attorneys that are actually working in our office right now. Most people are working at home, and everyone's gotten more and more familiar with this type of presentation. But as we've moved from home, there's been new IT security concerns to consider. So on this first slide, we just talk at a high level about a few of those. So one thing that comes to mind immediately is just when you leave the confines of the office, you're often on a home Wi-Fi security system. And if that's not VPN or managed by the organization, it might not have as much protection as you would like to see, or that you see in the office environment. So that introduces some vulnerability. There's ways to manage that, which I think Melanie will talk about in the next presentation, but this is just kind of what are some risks that come up. And then also, as people move home, there's more of a use of personal devices, and that can present issues as those devices are often shared amongst the household. To the extent there is monitoring by the organization, it can kind of start to get in touchy lines about whether the organization's monitoring work use or personal use. And then, people that are not just working at home, but working in the public, working at coffee shops, at libraries, or to the extent that, anything else is open right now to work at, there's the risk of just people overseeing what you're working at, people, stealing devices that have sensitive information, also things getting dropped, things getting damaged. And so obviously, the risks grow as you're not in the secure office location that everyone's accustomed to. And then finally, physical document issues. Joe and I obviously deal a lot with sensitive physical documents, and I think that's probably common in the nonprofit space too. So normally there's shredders and things, and there's badges to get into secure locations, and you can have a little bit more confidence about who's, you can be a little bit more lax about what you're doing with physical documents because there's these kind of physical security measures. But as that people move to remote work environments or to public work environments, that laxity about how we treat physical documents needs to be rethought a little bit, and so that there's not sensitive papers laying around the house, and that there is kind of a process for retaining or destroying documents as is proper, without maybe the resources that were expected in the office environment. Joe, I don't know if you had anything to expand on that first slide.
Yeah, I mean, stepping through these bullets just in practical application to your workforce, a lot of the items here can be addressed, obviously through additional tech platforms, but then you want to be sensitive to the fact that, A, those come with budgetary concerns, and B, communication is going to be the first thing that you need to handle with your workforce. So home Wi-Fi security, when you say, you're working from home, your Wi-Fi is not as secure, unless somebody has a tech background, there's not an understanding that certain Wi-Fi networks aren't secure, right? So when you say that, it doesn't resonate with somebody. You want to make sure that home Wi-Fi networks, if somebody has a Comcast internet system, right, they're enabling a password security on their home Wi-Fi. They're making sure that devices outside of their direct household, right, are not connecting to their home Wi-Fi. So just basic things like enabling a password on your home Wi-Fi and making sure that your router's been secured. Those are pretty critically important, and they're super basic. So the first point there is educating people that not all Wi-Fi is the same. And the second is, you can reach out to your internet service provider, or you can go on Comcast or whoever provides home Wi-Fi and figure out how to enable a password. The second is use of personal devices. Again, unless there's some level of tech savviness, the concept of, is this a personal device or is this a work device? It doesn't resonate with people. They say, this is my computer. And the only time they've ever seen this distinction is when they log in through a bank portal and you check the checkbox that says, remember my password, this is my personal device. So educating folks that a personal device and storing passwords on your personal home device can be a problem, because a personal device outside of an encrypted and secure network can expose any data behind that password protection at a level that is really unacceptable. So encouraging folks not to store passwords to Google Drives or Dropboxes or emails or other things on their personal computer is really important. If somebody's personal computer is compromised and there are all sorts of passwords stored, you can get through that password protection and then that data can be exposed. So the tip there around employee communication is, just making sure that there is an understanding that when it's your personal device, don't store work passwords. Working in public, again, a lot of people will say right now, well, there's no working in public going on because everything's shut down. But for anyone with kids, right, people are now trying to venture out of the house and find a place where they can work that they may not be disturbed by family. So they're doing that with their personal device frequently. It's making sure if you're working outside of the house, you're not leaving your personal device either unlocked and exposed and asking somebody to watch it at a coffee shop while you're not monitoring it, and just understanding, the heightened risk there. And then again, physical document issues. People don't talk about shredding papers much because in an office environment, there's secure information disposal and papers are shredded. But when you have home printers and people take papers that may have donor information or may have financial information, and they're not thinking about how sensitive it is, and then they just throw it in the recycle bin that sits outside of somebody's house, you need to encourage folks, and we've seen some folks do, de minimis employee reimbursements to buy, basic things like home shredders to ensure that that information is not just set by the curb. So a lot of it is employee communication, but basic practices can help raise the bar on these top 4 security risks. I think we can go to the next slide.
And I think, like Joe said, all the practical kind of easy things that can be done to lower some of these risks, but it's also important to be cognizant of the background, which a lot of this is occurring against in the legal landscape, and that is the proliferation of these data protection statutes and more regulatory attention on how data is treated, especially sensitive data. These haven't really directly implicated the nonprofit sphere so far. They're more relating to big companies that buy and sell data and use data in ways that weren't necessarily authorized by the person that provided the data. But this is definitely moving in a direction where people that hold sensitive data are being expected to do more to protect that data. And there's outside of just the legal requirements, there's also oftentimes contractual requirements that come with donations or come with people that provided sensitive information one way or another. And kind of how this whole framework is evolving is around this concept of reasonable information security protections, and that, that's a multi-factor analysis that includes things like the sensitivity of the data, the sophistication of the organization, and how, the resources that the organization has to put into information security. But I think the thing to remember here is that when you're doing this kind of reasonableness analysis, the fact that people are working from home and that there's inherently kind of less security protections just by the fact that people are all over the place, and the stuff that Joe and I talked about in the last slide kind of needs to be thought of when you're thinking about, how are we protecting this data? Are we doing it in a way that's reasonable to the sensitivity of the things that we have, and how it's being spread throughout the organization? And then finally, beyond contractual liability or behind kind of these evolving regulatory schemes, there's also just the reputational damage, the potential reputational damage of a data breach. If a data breach does happen, there's statutes in every state that require notification to donors, often require notification to the people that provided the data, oftentimes also to the state attorney general, and it can be very bad for your relations with donors, relations with the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis. So beyond just the legal liability, maintaining trust, I think, with the stakeholders in your organization just drives home the importance of having these reasonable security protections.
And so I think, application, these concepts can be a little bit difficult because a lot of organizations don't actually track or have never cataloged the information that they may come into possession of, whether outside of the ordinary course or in the ordinary course of business. And I think a great example of this is, the forms that everybody has filled out 15 times as part of an annual physical at a doctor's office that may include your social security number and your date of birth. And you think about that and you say, well, why is that? Right? It's just because it's a form that has always been used. But this is a good time, especially with the heightened risk of working from home, to actually catalog what data you do have, and then apply an analysis of, do I need this data at all? Because sometimes you do not. And then is the method and manner in which I'm gathering it and storing it appropriate for the type of data that's there, right? So how many individuals have access to it? Are the forms being stored? Do the forms need to be stored where they're stored, or does that data need to be stored at all over the long term, or is that a temporary, ingest the data, process the data, and then dispose of the data? So I think, the attention to data breaches is obviously something people say, well, I don't want to be the subject of a data breach, right? Part of that's out of your control. The question then is, if there is a data breach, right, what data could be exposed? And, a lot of folks will cover off this risk with insurance policies covering data breaches, which can be, relatively expensive depending on the data that you have. But I think an internal analysis and a first step of, what data do we have, who has access to it, and what's the method and manner in which we're gathering and storing it is just critical. And to the extent that you do have the bandwidth in your organization to do, high level review, and then maybe talk with your insurance broker about insuring the risks after you've looked at the best practices around what you're doing, that can help mitigate a lot of the regulatory overhang here, which comes with, again, substantial legal liability and penalties, but then reputational damage that's difficult to quantify. We can jump to the next slide.
And here, I think we've been touching on this throughout, but there are a number of things that nonprofits can think about as people continue to work from home and when they move back. I mean, some of these are applicable in both the office and home environment, and many of these are pretty low, low-hanging fruit, don't require that much investment. And, like Joe mentioned in the first slide, are just a lot about kind of employee education, employee reminders, and just basic things. So here, password management, we talked about that. So, to the extent that you can kind of have a process that's just regular where passwords are updated, where you have maybe a simple password policy that, requires a certain level of complexity and discusses where you shouldn't keep passwords and things like that. That can go a long way. A lot of these data breaches come from simple things like hacking someone's password, and then once they're inside of an org, they can a lot of damage can be done with just this one vulnerability. So to the extent that passwords are just regularly updated and have certain levels of complexity, we're all familiar with this process. It makes it easy for everyone. And that, the next bullet point is tied into that, just reminders of the confidentiality responsibilities. So some people, when you're in the office environment, you're dealing with confidentiality stuff, confidential stuff all the time. You're used to, relying on the office security, physical security protections. But when you move out of that environment and you're back into a home environment where maybe rules are kind of a little bit more blurred, it's good to remind employees of the confidentiality of the information that they're working with and just the responsibility they have to do the right thing and protect it in a reasonable way. Similarly, rules for use of work devices, to the extent that employees are being provided with work devices, have rules for who can use that in the household, that it should only be the employee and that it should be used for work activities and not kind of browsing the internet or getting things where you can get some of this malware or some of these viruses that can then get into the work systems. Employee training generally, something, phishing avoidance is another kind of low-hanging fruit, where people just recognize what a suspicious email looks like and when not to click on things. And that can also just be a very simple training process that, again, that like password hacking, phishing is a major way that data breaches happen, and it's something that can be educated about pretty simply. For organizations that are dealing with more sensitive information like health information or financial information that's really got account information, social security number, financial account passwords, or things, you might target encryption of that information might be something you want to think about, just both when it's being emailed within and outside the organization, then also at rest on the computers that it's being stored with. And maybe you want to limit who has access to that information throughout the organization through permissioning technology and things like that. And then finally, strategic use of technology to do the things that we talked about. And I think Melanie's going to go into this a little bit in her presentation too, but having things like access logs so you can see who accessed information where, that everybody was in the organization that was accessing it, that there's no suspicious kind of records of access. And the same thing with permissioning to try to limit who has access to the people, limiting access to the information to people that need access to it, not just having it kind of be generally available to the whole organization.
So again, I think a lot of this, you read through these bullets, and especially words like phishing avoidance, an immensely complex concept. And I think it's actually really well handled by a lot of either free online trainings or very cost-effective trainings that are, 10, 20 minutes. Everyone's been through them, right? There's a short quiz at the end, and just orienting folks to the risks that are out there of downloading attachments from unsecure sources, or opening attachments, or even opening emails from a sender that they don't recognize, right? And not the sender's name, but the actual domain, or scrutinizing the email, and especially for folks that have frequent contact with folks outside of their network, that's absolutely essential. So the educational portion of this, and at least allowing folks to do their own red flag analysis is critical, right? People who want to hack into your network, they'll probably be able to hack into your network, right? But that's not, based on the data and industry studies the biggest risk. The biggest risk is the individual employee who's sitting at their desk, who opens either a personal or work email, and then their computer's compromised. So spending a fair amount of time at least orienting folks to what phishing or spear phishing is and what the risk is pretty important, because you want to disabuse the folks who are on the front line from hacking. If my computer's hacked, there's nothing I can do about it. No, this is the phishing avoidance is up there with the Wi-Fi network password and saving passwords on your devices. They're really straightforward things that you can do that rise to and are really required to comply with some reasonableness for IT security protections. So I think we may be done a minute or two early, and I'm sure there's quite a bit that we can cover in the Q&A, but a lot of the applications of this learning is handled in webinars and through policies and procedures, either in employee onboarding or frequently employee handbooks and associated policies. And we can obviously help point you to resources on the internet if that would be helpful.
Wow, thank you, Joe and Jack. That is a lot of really great information that you have shared. And I know there are questions, and as we talked about in the beginning, we're going to reserve the opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask those questions. And so again, for those of you participating, if you have questions as a result of the presenter's information, please put that into the chat function so that we can continue to move those forward at the end of the presentations. So wow, again, thank you. That was super insightful in so many ways. I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Melanie Meyer, with Tech Impact. Melanie has a 20-year history working with a nonprofit for the overall strategic direction of technology, systems, and processes, as well as marketing, communications, and event management. In her role with Tech Impact, Melanie advises nonprofits on how to incorporate and use technology and data to make better decisions about how to operate, engage, and serve its constituents. Welcome, Melanie.
Welcome. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here and look forward to sharing some valuable information. Sorry, now I'm going to cough. I'm happy to join today, share what the new norm is looking for nonprofits, and just, of course, the perfect time to start coughing. I just want to reiterate some points that Joe and Jack made. Extremely helpful advice. I think we have some common themes in our presentations. Obviously, security should be at the top of mind for any technology decisions. In regards to the point about the home Wi-Fi security, in conjunction with setting a strong password, make sure to change the default, SSID and admin credentials. In terms of data breaches, it's not a pretty circumstance when it hits. Some nonprofits still have information on outdated servers, which hackers are aware of and looking for. If you have a Windows 8 server, it is no longer supported by Microsoft and not receiving the necessary security patches. So you need to move on this now and get your data secure. Reiterate taking the time to set policies and procedures for technology use. And just in terms of phishing attacks, your biggest defense is educating your staff. That is your biggest vulnerability. All it takes is one click. KnowBe4 is a great resource for nonprofits for cybersecurity training, risk, and awareness. You can also do some phishing attempts on your staff just to see who needs, additional education in that area. I'm going to share some high level advice, but my first part of advice is to consult with your IT administrator or consultant if you have any questions. Bring your concerns and make sure that, your issues are being addressed. At the beginning of the pandemic, Tech Impact and 501 Commons put together a website, prepareresponseserve.org, that has a host of resources. So if we don't address something here, definitely check out that site. There are, low cost options, lists, resources, webinars. TechSoup also has a great website with a list of tools and donated products. At the end of the presentation, I have included links to all of these resources. Again, these resources are a great guide, but please do your research and see what will work best for your organization and team. Just recently, I read a study by Nonprofit HR. It was a pulse study to 800 plus nonprofits. 69% of respondent organizations are now contemplating remote work as a longer term option beyond the coronavirus crisis. So really in this presentation, what I wanted to focus on was what nonprofits are doing short term and then an advice for longer term options. So let me go to the next slide. I think the first thing that was a surprise for nonprofits was hardware. Nonprofits, typically look for inexpensive solutions for technology, and they soon learn that desktops are not very portable. Nonprofits had limited laptops and devices. Those that could afford to purchase laptops had a difficult time because right after the pandemic hit, there was a shortage of hardware. Staff accommodated this shortfall in equipment by using their personal devices. The biggest issue with staff using personal devices, like Jack and Joe said, is the security risk to the organization. Personal computers, could have outdated home version of operating systems and applications, lack of outdated antivirus, no user authentication or weak passwords. Plus personal devices are usually shared by multiple family members, opening up additional risk. So we can go to the next slide. So when it comes to hardware, I recommend looking for equipment that will better your staff in the future. We are hearing more requests where nonprofits want to replace all their desktop with laptops and docking stations to make it easy on the staff to be remote. A good pair of headsets is now a necessity. When purchasing laptops, I cannot stress enough to purchase business grade equipment. Stay away from Costco, Walmart, and Best Buy. Consumer grade laptops do not have the right operating system, are filled with bloatware, and have a shorter lifespan. CDW, Dell, Lenovo are great resources with nonprofit discounts, and you can, purchase refurbished equipment through TechSoup. If staff are going to continue to use their personal computers to work, at minimum, I would make sure that the, updates are applied every day. That includes the operating system, Windows updates, web browsers such as Firefox and Chrome, Adobe Reader, Java. And if you're using a video conference system such as Zoom and GoToMeeting, make sure that you're doing those regular updates. Make sure staff have fully up-to-date antivirus. Windows Defender is good and is now standard on Windows 10. If the long-term plan is for staff to continue to use their personal devices, talk to your IT professional about implementing mobile application management, or MAM. MAM will allow you to set security settings to applications, restrict actions such as the ability to copy, paste, print, save and print. It will set authentication policies for opening apps like PINs or multi-factor authentications, and it will provide you with the ability to selectively wipe organization data. If your staff have organization computers, talk to your IT professional about implementing mobile device management. MDM provides, administrators full control of devices. MDM can set security parameters, to access devices like PIN or multi-factor authentication, and also can provide control to remote wipe a device or force a password reset. Next slide. I say one of the biggest hurdles we've seen nonprofits face was the ability to access their files. Those that were already using cloud solutions like Box, Dropbox, Google, and SharePoint were in pretty good shape. Organizations with on-prem servers either had VPN access set up or scrambled to, scrambled to provide access to additional users. Nonprofits soon learned that VPN access was all we know it, if we've ever used it, that it's slow and the experience is not always consistent. Some organizations use desktop viewers like TeamViewer to access, their desktop in the office so that they could still perform some business functions that were not cloud ready. TeamViewer is a great short-term solution, but it's not going to serve the organization in the long run. So my advice is if you're not using a cloud solution for file sharing, now is the time to look at all your options and decide what will work best for your organization. If your organization is, using G Suite, then Google Drive might be the best. If you're using Office 365, then a transition to SharePoint makes sense. Other options like Box and Dropbox integrate extremely well with both Google and Office 365. I would have to give credit to nonprofit staff. When we're faced with challenges, we get resourceful, and staff was resourceful when the pandemic, hit and moved some files to various cloud solutions so that they could continue to work. I'm hearing too often that staff move their files to a OneDrive or a Google Drive, or other solutions so that they could access their set of files. I strongly recommend that document protocols be created and enforced for files. These need to be on a central store, and staff, you're going to run into issues with version control and not having inventory of all of your data. On that note, I just want to reiterate something that I say all the time. OneDrive is not meant for shared files. In Office 365, you have OneDrive and SharePoint. So you have to think of the names. One equals OneDrive, share equals SharePoint. Same with G Suite. There is My Drive and Share Drive. The individual is the My Drive and the share is the Share Drive. If you need assistance on, reviewing cloud solutions and what will work best for you, there is a link to a cloud comparison on prepareresponseserve.org, or talk with your IT professional and make sure you're using TechSoup to secure your nonprofit licensing at a discount. Next slide. One piece of advice we always give nonprofits is to embrace a unified cloud solution for productivity and collaboration. So not just to think of Google and Office 365 as an email and file share solution, but if you are going to use them as an email and file share solution, my advice is not to have your email in Office 365 and your file share in Google Drive. It just, you should be in one unified system. Teams and Google Hangouts have been instrumental in keeping staff connected through video, file sharing, and chat. If you use these options at the beginning of the pandemic and abandoned using them because they didn't have the features you wanted, please check them out again. Microsoft and Google have added a host of features and regular updates are being added. Explore other options in these suites like Planner and Office 365 for project and team task management. Check out Keep on Google for staff collaboration on notes and to-dos. If you go to Microsoft or Google, there are training videos and information on all the apps built within these suites. So definitely take the time to check them out. Next slide. If you're not using one of the unified systems, other collaboration tools that you might want to consider checking out, These are great tools to consider for project management, staff resource page, task management. Slack also has video. Limnu, Stormboard, and Sketchboard have great whiteboard tools. The three I hear most often that nonprofits are using besides Team and Hangouts are Slack, Asana, and Basecamp. Most of them vary in pricing based on your needs. Slack has their paid version available to nonprofits for free for 3 months. Other nonprofits, all the other solutions have nonprofit discounts as well. My biggest advice is on whatever system you are using, that there is consistency to what the organization is going to use. I hear too often that staff use a variety of tools and leadership doesn't necessarily know what those tools are used for. You need to have documentation and management about what different solutions are being used for what and what information is being shared on what platforms. You should also consider implementing a password management, like Jack and Joe said. LastPass and Password Vault are great options. You can also find a list of password vaults on the prepareresponseserve.org website for password managers. Next slide. I would say most of the conversations that have just started trickling in lately is organizations are looking to upgrade their phone systems. They're looking for solutions that will allow them to make and receive calls as if they were in the office. Soft phones, phones that can be accessed by your computer or other devices via app are becoming the norm. I know some organizations, staff are making phone calls from their cell phones using their personal numbers. And in a lot of circumstances, nonprofits, work with sensitive clientele, and that's not a very good solution for the organization. Take a look at voice over IP options for your organization. Voice over IP uses your internet connection versus a phone line to make phone calls. On your home router, you might need to open up a port or whatever for that voice over IP to work, but you can just call your cable company and have that done. Voice over IP offers the flexibility to have a typical office phone paired with the soft phone app to work wherever you are. Teams Voice is a great option for calling. Right now, Tech Impact has an option to pair a traditional voice over IP with Microsoft Teams Voice. The added benefit of using Microsoft Teams for calling, but also the features of traditional voice over IP, such as auto attendant and call groups. Great nonprofits are using Google Voice. Google Voice was free, but just recently started charging $20 per user per month. Nonprofits still get a discounted rate of $12 per month per user. Those that are already using Google Voice are grandfathered in at the free rate, so that's good news. Ring Central and 8x8 are also other great options. Next slide. Oh, we're back on video conferencing tools. There we go. For video conferencing, I don't think I talked to a nonprofit that is not using Zoom. Some other video conferencing tools are Teams, Hangouts, Blue Jeans, Kaltura, and Ring Central. This is not meant to be a comprehensive list, just a starting point. If you use Office 365 and you already have Teams included, and if you use G Suite, you already have Hangouts included. We see nonprofits using a combination of these solutions, typically Zoom for public presentations and Teams or Hangouts for staff and one-on-one meetings. Zoom now has a nonprofit discount offer on TechSoup, so please check that out if you aren't receiving it. There is also, Zoom for Healthcare, which is HIPAA compliant, and it's available for $200 a month. My advice, again, back to the one point is to make sure that you're doing those regular updates for all of these platforms that you are using. When there is a security vulnerability, that's what those patches are fixing and those updates. So make sure you continue to do those. And again, if Teams and Hangouts didn't work for you at the beginning of the pandemic, please check them out again. They have improved substantially since the beginning. Also, if you're interested and you're using Teams and you're having some struggles with it, Tech Impact recently released some on-demand trainings, and we developed for administrators of Teams some ways to set up Teams and explore some additional features and functions to enable. There's also some great links to end user trainings. Next slide. And something that's really great is that we have seen a host of new offerings for virtual events. Nonprofits are getting creative to keep stakeholders involved. You could still do events using basic web conferencing like Zoom, but if you want to do something more sophisticated like organizer trainings, workshop, and breakout discussions or virtual conference, fundraising event, you might need more features. One example is Fast Forward's Accelerate Good Global 2020 conference, which happened in March. They used Hopin to virtually host one conference with breakout sessions, different speakers, and sponsor booths. Next slide. Some other tools, Wova and Run the World, Zoom, which we mentioned previously, has breakout room depending on your license. Some of these options you can also have coordinators run your event, so it's not all on the staff. I've been hearing nonprofits are having great success with online fundraising events. They're having more engagement and surpassing their fundraising goals. With these tools, you have the ability to stream across multiple platforms, including Facebook, YouTube, and really expand your reach. So, if you were thinking about canceling your big event this year, consider exploring your options. I wouldn't necessarily give up. Next slide. This one is, people get used to paper and pen. So maybe you need to have people sign release or acknowledgement forms, or you need providers to sign contracts. For that, for tools such as DocuSign and Adobe Pro can assist you with completing paperwork virtually. DocuSign will run you about $40 a month, and Adobe Pro Cloud version is available on TechSoup for about $15 a month. Or for simpler options, scanning signed documents, Scanner and Microsoft Lens are both mobile phone apps that simulate a desktop scanner. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but some organizations still need a fax. So they're still receiving faxes in their office, and there is a person that's running to that office getting those fax. So I would recommend using something like an e-fax, where you can receive faxes via email. You do have to go and port your number over, but it's going to serve you better in the long run. Next slide. Just some final thoughts and recommendations. Now is not the time to skimp on technology. You need to invest. Think long-term versus immediate need. Consider forming a technology committee within the organization, or including an outside consultant to plan for the future and set policies and protocols. Make sure you are getting feedback from staff and addressing their needs. Provide regular trainings for staff. Most times changes are not adopted because of lack of training and understanding. Make sure you set and enforce policy and procedures. You need to keep your information secure, structured, and accessible. And the last slide, as I mentioned, check out, the site prepareresponseserve.org. There is a bunch of incredible resources. Also, TechSoup has a site dedicated to COVID-19 resources, which is incredible. And then check out our website for upcoming events. We have a webinar on bring your own device security, and one that I'm most excited about, which is a 3-part training on remote program delivery. So I just want to take this time to thanks everyone for your time, and I'm sorry for having that little cough in the beginning of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Melanie. That was such great advice. Appreciate you narrowing down options and talking through nonprofit discounts. I mean, there's so much information out there about, where do I go? What do I do? In addition to the resource page that's here on the slides, we've also added those same web pages to the chat function. So again, if you're following along as we've been presenting, those are right there at your fingertips in the chat function as well. And thank you again, Melanie. So insightful and so many great suggestions.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as you can see, our final presenter is already on the screen, and I'd like to introduce him. He is a friend and former colleague of the Michigan Nonprofit Association, Leon Wilson. Leon has over 25 years in information technology, currently as the Chief of Digital Innovation and Chief Information Officer at the Cleveland Foundation. In this dual role, Leon is part of the executive committee leading the Foundation's Information and Technology Services Department, focusing on strategic and transformational use of technology and data within the Foundation and the philanthropic sector. Additionally, as Chief of Digital Innovation, Leon oversees the Foundation's Digital Excellence grant-making strategy. It's geared towards building a stronger, more equitable, and inclusive digital community, tackling Cleveland's digital divide, along with elevating Greater Cleveland's position as an intelligent, smart city and regional technology innovation hub. Welcome, Leon.
Thank you, Kelly. And I'm glad I was able to hop on this call and listen to Melanie talk. I was busy taking copious notes what Melanie shared, and it didn't even dawn on me. And I like to consider myself sometimes as a big thinker. Something as simple as, how vendors phrase things, OneDrive and SharePoint, and they're quite intentional about their utilization if we take the time to really think about what is the fundamental purpose of that particular technology tool or not. So I found that extremely fascinating. I actually jotted that down, Melanie, so I'm really thrilled to get a chance to hear you talk. And I apologize for missing the other two presenters and hearing, because I was really interested to learn a lot more. As much as I think I know about cybersecurity and technology from a legal perspective, and I lean to being the Chief Information Officer at the Cleveland Foundation, there's always something more. There's always something additional to learn. So again, I'm going to look forward to watching that. What I was asked to share, and I'm asked to share a lot of these kind of conversations quite often, is more from the lens of, from a funder's perspective, what are we seeing? What's happening? How are nonprofits responding through the lens of a funder, as well as how are we as funders, how are we funding and how are we supporting these particular nonprofits? And in that thinking, I'm sure many of you, depending on where you are in various parts of Michigan, you've been familiar with some form of a COVID-19 rapid response fund, where your particular city, your particular metropolitan area, all basically channeled their energies and said, we need to raise dollars so that we can get PPE equipment to our first responders. We need to raise money so we can help out with the local food bank, because we have lines of families and households that need to get dealing with food insecurities and a host of other things that when mid-March, kind of hit us like a bomb dropped on us. We all had to scurry, we all had to react, and we all had to respond. And we did likewise at the Cleveland Foundation. And in Greater Cleveland, Ohio, we're kind of like the largest funder, and we're a community foundation. So we see it all, we hear it all, we fund it almost all, if you will. What I've seen and what I've been able to share, what I can share with you from a funder's perspective is two things. And a lot of it ties into what Melanie was saying, and some of it probably even ties into what the other presenters were saying earlier. Is we're seeing you have the nonprofits, the everyday nonprofit that just saw what occurred when their governor, Governor Whitmer in Michigan, and our governor here in Ohio issued shelter-in-place orders and told the schools shut down, told the libraries shut down. And then you identified those particular nonprofits and hospitals that were deemed essential services. Surprisingly, we as a foundation, we were deemed essential services because I guess they still wanted us to cut the check. But what we saw is you had a handful of nonprofits, many that just says, okay, how do we keep doing what we do, but now with gloves and masks? And that's pretty much was it. So we saw a great preponderance and a great uptick in a number of funding requests from every particular nonprofit in our funding area, asking for that equipment, those dollars, so they can do exactly what they've been designed to do, but with social distancing in place, with masks in place, with gloves in place. And from a technology standpoint, where that came in is, wow, every one of our employees, we haven't issued them a laptop, or we haven't thought about not when one or two people have to work remotely, what happens when all of us have to work remotely? How does that change the paradigm of how we interact with one another, and how do we interact with the constituents that we're trying to serve? So a lot of requests came in asking for dollars to, procure equipment, dollars to buy additional software licenses, to do this, that, and the other. And we were, depending on the nonprofit that was making the ask and how essential that nonprofit was versus a non-essential nonprofit. And again, are you dealing with direct social service issues, direct, life or death issues, or are you running a after-school program that is still relevant and important, but first we want to make sure that this virus doesn't spread before. So we tried to tier how we were funding. But beyond that, asking, give me the dollars. And the other thing that we did was, for many of our funders, we provided them relief to say that no matter how we gave you dollars, no matter what the funding was for a particular program, whatever, in this time, we're relieving you of your obligation of still using our dollars for what it was intentionally designed, and use the dollars as you need to use it. So if you need to use those dollars to cover payroll for a period or two, go for it. If you need to use the dollars so that you can buy PPE equipment or buy other things or cover your rent, go for it. Do what you have to do. So a lot of foundations went that way, where they basically released the restrictions on their funding dollars to say, whatever back office, whatever operational things you need to do, make it happen. Because we don't want you to basically go under. But beyond that, there were those nonprofits, and this was really fascinating. And there's always that quote that necessity is the mother of invention. There were a handful of nonprofits that says, how do we take this opportunity to really think differently? If we're a food pantry, historically and traditionally, we've been designed to where we get all the food donated. We open up hours that people can come by, AM and PM hours. They come to our facility, they pick up their bag, they pick up their box, they pick up their carton, and they go their way. And we keep track of how much food we brought in, how much food we gave out. But what if we have to social distance, if we have to shelter in place, how can we support that but still do what we do? Can we turn ourselves into a form of a Grubhub? Can we turn ourselves in a form of a DoorDash? Can we turn ourselves in a form of a Uber Eats? Where what we're going to do, for those who still physically need to come to us, they will. But for that senior that we don't want them hopping on the public transit and trucking it down here, or being driven by their grandchild to come out here and pick up their food, tell us what you need and we'll come to you. So we're gonna augment how we operate. We're going to use this as an opportunity to leverage things that we see happening in this new shared economy, in this digital disruption. And we're going to use that to our own benefits, and we're going to use that to our ability. So we're going to do things slightly differently. We're not going to stick to our traditional orthodoxies. And if we're a nonprofit where, by and large, it's all about community, it's all about collaboration, how do we do that community? How do we do that collaboration when we can't convene together? Yeah, there's some things we can do via a Zoom call or GoToWebex or a Google Hangout or Microsoft Teams call, but how are we sharing and collaborating with one another? Before mid-March, before February, or definitely before 2020, we will all go to our rec center. We will all go to this community center. We will all have people come to us after hours. We would sit around a table. We would pass out handouts. We would pass out flyers, and we would just engage in the work of community outreach, community engagement, community support, after-school programming, working with youth to help them with behavioral management issues and stuff like that, or inspiring them to learn new trades and new tricks and help them with their educational aspirations. But how do we do that if we can't come together? Do we just close up shop and wait for the vaccines to come out? Or do we try to transform this? So kind of like what Melanie was talking about, whereas now we need to leverage technology, but we're not just leveraging technology for ourselves, we're leveraging technology for how we execute and facilitate our mission. There was a talk that I gave at a nonprofit tech conference back in 2018. And I was basically talking about this third wave of how nonprofits need to look at technology. And I called it the extended view, where you're not just looking at how you're using technology for processing, paperwork, or for signing documents, or for sharing Word documents or Google Docs between your individual staff members. You're challenging yourself to say, how can we leverage technology to expand our reach to our community? How can we leverage technology to expand the people that we serve, that we engage with, that is part of our core mission when we go back to the funders and show them all the great things that we do, and we give all the stories of an experience and showing the impact that we're making in our community. It was called that extended view. And I said that was the true opportunity for innovation. And what I see happening right now in 2020, and what we were thrust into, every nonprofit, large, small, medium size, we were thrust into that wormhole, where now when we come out of this wormhole, things look differently. We have to operate differently. And what we thought was we were doing a yeoman's job with technology and the utilization of technology. Now we got to think even bolder, bigger, and braver. And when you're talking and when you're thinking like that as a nonprofit, and then you're coming to a funder like the Cleveland Foundation, or in Michigan, you may have the Greater Flint Community Foundation, or the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, or the Capital Area Community Foundation in Lansing. When you're going to your respective community foundation, or even private foundation, if you're going to Kresge, if you're going to CS Mott, Ruth Mott, or if you're going to Skillman, and the list goes on and on, approaching them and saying, hey, we're treating this as an opportunity, and we want to be far more innovative about how we're leveraging technology, I will guarantee you that you will definitely get their ear more so than the litany of other nonprofits that are all asking for the same thing. Give us dollars so we can do what we do the same way we've been doing it. I'm going to buy some more computers so my staff can work remotely. And yeah, I may even push the envelope, and instead of relying on wet signatures, I'm going to adopt DocuSign to do electronic signatures. I've done that before, I've seen that done. So let's see if we can use DocuSign. Or we're going to now start relying on OneDrive and Microsoft Teams and Google Suites and stuff like that. And that's all great, and you should use that. But we're going to really look at how we execute our mission and we're going to talk to those thought leaders. We're going to talk to those big thinkers. We're going to talk to the Melanies of the world and so forth, and have them help us understand how can we see how we operate, but through a different lens, through that lens of this digital economy, through technology. Because whatever happens, as we get this vaccine, as we all, so to speak, go back to norm, there will never be a norm. There will be a new norm. There will be this hybrid mode. And how are you taking advantage of that and catapulting yourself to where you're providing greater impact to your community, greater impact to your city, greater impact to your neighborhood, to the folks that you're trying to serve? That's the biggest challenge. That's the paradox prize. That's the conundrum that, as a funder, I can say, we'd be challenging those to, take that leap of faith, take that step to really broaden your stretch, broaden your reach, broaden your approach and your impact. And as opposed to being just one of yet another nonprofit asking for yet another set of additional hardware, additional equipment, because while you may have had a backup plan, you may have had a disaster recovery plan, trust me, none of us had a plan for a pandemic. None of us had a plan for a public health crisis. We didn't. We had plans for if the building caught on fire. We had plans for if the electricity went out. We had plans if there was another brownout, if there was a blizzard. We had plans for all of that kind of stuff. And because all those things were temporal, they were only going to last 2 or 3 days, and then we're back to business. What about something that lasts 2 to 3 months? What about something that lasts a year? What about something that lasts a year and a half? How do you operate? How are you transforming yourself in that light? So the last thing I'll say, because I know I wasn't given a whole lot of time, but I just wanted to share some insight from a funder's perspective. The other things that I have been seeing, and what is great, and what we do want to continue to see, even from an internal operation standpoint, this has been the opportunity where you have broken down walls between different departments within your organization. You have broken down orthodoxies, rigid traditions that you use, because that's just the way we've done it ever since the first executive director of our nonprofit. You're now looking at automation. How can we automate things? How can we automate approvals? How can we, get things processing through where I just can't drop it in someone's inbox on their desk and then they come by and pick it up? How do we now navigate that? How do we leverage technology for those kind of things? How do we use Microsoft Teams in more ways than we ever imagined? How do we use Google's G Suite in more ways than we ever imagined? How do we do whiteboarding when we don't have access to our whiteboards? How do we do brainstorming when we don't have access to individuals, or we may have Zoom fatigue? Or when people in their 8-hour day have now stretched that 8-hour day into 10 to 12 hour window where I'll get my 8 hours done, but it won't be clock in at 9, clock out at 5. It's going to be, I'm going to get up at 7:30, do a little bit of work, and go out, take a little walk. I'm going to come back and do 2 or 3 hours of work, and then I'm going to take a breather. So how does that change how we operate? How does that change how we function? And how can technology help us keep the productivity levels up without causing our staff members to burn out or for things to fall through cracks? So I'm going to stop there, Kelly, and see if there's any questions or any comments, or if you want to, ask any follow-up questions to what I've shared.
Thanks, Leon. Great information, and appreciate the perspective that you offer. At this point, we are going to open it to our questions, and we do have some questions. And I'd like for all of the presenters to come back, if we could, and maybe turn on your cameras as well, because some of the questions I think are technical and probably geared towards the front part of the conversation. And then I think the other ones are geared towards maybe kind of this long-term planning. And I think it would be great to hear all of your perspectives in addition to how you all might answer specific questions from a technical standpoint. So I'll kind of ask the questions, I think, back in the format of how we presented the information today. So one of the things that I think we've heard loud and clear through all of the presentations was thinking about ways to minimize risk, right? So the whole password piece, we heard that repeated a couple times. We also heard, how to train and orient the process and procedures. I think if there's one thing that was a main message in all of this, it's making sure that while your initial response may not have been ready to put in a new policy and procedure. If this is the way forward of operating in a virtual environment, now's the time for you to be thinking about your policies and procedures and putting in, you know, changes and tweaks and training, not necessarily just expecting that it's business as usual, especially if you're looking into bringing in some of these new ones, which Melanie covered a lot of great options, you know, to the teams, all the way to virtual events and things like that. So back to the technical kind of side and thinking about the risk component. What is the frequency that someone should think about for changing those passwords? Is there a rhythm? Is there a best practice? It was recommended that that was a way to reduce your risk, but what's the frequency somebody should think about doing that?
I think my answer is going to surprise most. It's not the frequency, it's the complexity. I think in a day and age when there are so many phishing attempts, that it's really that passwords vary and they're complex versus the frequency. Old school was to to change the passwords every 3 to 6 months. Now it's implementing something like a password vault or just having a very complex password and not changing it as often. We've all received those phishing attempts from that look like they're from Microsoft, and they're like, hey, will you change your password? You know, your Office 365 administrator wants you to change it, and that is an open door to phishing attempts. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add or has a different viewpoint.
I can add. Oh, go ahead, Joseph.
Oh, I was just going to say quickly, the password situation is important, right? So if you have one very complex password for every single thing, and every time you change it for your bank, then you use the same password for, your Delta Sky Miles or your Gmail or something, that doesn't really do much for you. And there was an interesting article today in the New York Times about sophisticated phishing attempt through LinkedIn communications and attachments sent through a fake job posting, which actually was targeted at a private company. And then from there, the hackers went very deep into confidential government information. So it's all passwords, right? You can obviously control your employees' cadence of resetting the passwords that have to do with their job and encouraging them to use complex passwords for job-related items, but also encouraging them to take those principles and apply them to their personal accounts is also really important, because if a personal account is hacked and they're using a personal device, they're off to the races, whoever's stealing their information.
Yeah, this is Lynn. I just did a IT security webinar yesterday with N10, and I echo what Melanie and also what Joseph said, that there's starting to be, for many years, we in the IT space have always argued and extolled 3 to 6 months. Change your password every 3 to 6 months, every 30 days. That was the rubric. That was the gold standard. But even the NIST, the National Institute for Science and Technology, they started saying that might have been the wrong approach, because by doing it that way, people are going to be people. We're human creatures. We're going to go the path of least resistance. So telling me to change my password every 30 days, okay, so I'm going to call it my favorite baseball player's last name and just put a 1 behind it. And then the next time I'll just change the 1 to a 2. And then I'll change the 2 to a 3. Or I'll just flip it. I'm just going to do what I got to do just to get by. So what they're now encouraging is don't have rigid password frequency changes, but encourage people to change their passwords rather frequently, but you're inviting them to change it. And you're giving them the capabilities for through self-servicing password resetting to do all that kind of stuff. The emphasis is strong passwords or strong passphrases over how frequent. Now, if you truly have a mission critical type of thing, yeah, for that one, you might not want to let them create a strong password and leave it that way for a year, because you're giving the hackers 1 year to figure it out. Is really how you have to think about it. That was the whole reason around frequency, is you want to keep things hopping. You want to keep the hackers on their toes and not having to figure it out. And the longer that password stays the way it is, the longer time you're giving a hacker to figure it out. But it's interesting that Everybody's now talking about, yeah, we've been talking about 3 to 6 months, but when you got 12 different passwords you're trying to manage, and I agree with you, Joseph, you just have that one password that you use for every social media account. And so if I get that one, I got all the others. We want to try to break those bad habits and promote good habits.
Great, thank you. So kind of keeping in that same spirit, and I think Melanie covered a little bit of this with some of the resources that she provided. I just wanted to also give another opportunity to see if anybody else had any good orientation resources around the phishing avoidance piece. So that was kind of the other technical piece. You know, recognizing that training and helping our staff understand how to avoid that. What, does anybody have any suggestions, or could you reiterate some of the suggestions that have been made to kind of direct or point towards a resource that would help people cut to the chase and get right to supporting a staff education around that?
I would say what we recommend is know before. Trust me, you won't want to go anywhere on the internet after watching some of those training videos. You're going to be afraid of every move you make. But they do great cybersecurity awareness training, how to identify phishing attempts, you know, the various ways that attackers will try to gain access. And I think, you know, they have the tools built in for you know, for end user training, but also gives administrators the flexibility to try and attempt to fish their own staff so that they can identify where further education is needed.
Yeah, I'll say that we use one called Wombat, and we have an extensive educational awareness, because what we've learned and what I try to educate for all my staff members and everybody at the Cleveland Foundation is that I have to change your as Joseph mentioned, I have to change your personal behavior around this period, because whatever bad habits you have at home, you're bringing that into the office. If you're clicking on everything at home, you're going to click on everything when you get in the office. So what we've done is extensive routine training sessions, test social phishing campaigns, and we gamify it. We reward people for finding something, say, hey, I think this is a phishing attack, and they send it to us, and we applaud them. We give them a $5 gift card. We encourage and incentivize them to. I actually made coasters. So I went to Vistaprint and bought a stack of coasters and threw them all over the office, and all it said was, think before you click. Because I need to impregnate that into their brain, into their psyche, because right now, what I'm hearing as a CIO, and as I talk to all other CIOs, now it's even more worse than ever, because we're working in our homes as opposed to coming in an office. You let your guard down a little bit because you're sitting on your couch. You're not sitting in your office chair. When you come to work and you dress up and you come into work, you're in a certain mindset. When you're at your home, you're in your home mindset. You're in your laid back, so it's a little bit different. And all it takes is one click for that hacker, for that phishing campaign to catch you. So now more than ever, social phishing, education, awareness, talking to your staff members, cautioning them, gamifying it is more important than because we're all working from home.
All right, I see a lot of head noddings and agreement there. So, all right. We spoke about in the presentation about, you know, consulting with your IT consultant and provider. And so as we think about that, can any one of you speak to what are the top 3 things they should start in that conversation with their IT consultant and provider? If everybody wants to answer, great. But if everybody has the same answer, great. So what are the top 3 things that you would recommend nonprofits begin the conversation with their IT consultants and providers?
Is it going to be me first again? Yeah. To make sure that their computers are getting the necessary patches and updates. What are your processes now? How many computers do you have that have fallen out of updates? If you still have Windows 7 machines or a 2008 server, you need to move on that now, and either, you know, I would not suggest any nonprofit replace a server or purchase hardware, is to really look at your cloud options. And then make sure that any cloud option that you're using, you know, the biggest thing is are you using multi-factor authentication to access your email and your files? That's the easiest thing for nonprofits to turn on and the biggest defense. And it surprises me every day how many do not have MFA turned on. If you know, organization that needs to meet compliance, make sure that you're getting your security assessed and you're doing everything to lock up your processes and procedures. And then just make sure that you trust your tech advisor. You know, most times volunteers mean well, and they really want to help out the organization, but you know, it's a volunteer, and they don't have the systems and the procedures in place to fully serve you. They're doing their best, but I would say you have to budget for managed services and for technology, and it's no longer should be put on the back burner. It's just too scary of a world nowadays. And Leon, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I mean, that's a lot of your background.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was, you know, with M&A, I was in that, I was in that direct role. But what I will say is, you got to find the right consultant. Make sure you have the right consultant to begin with, one that really is looking out for the best interests of your organization and helping you know what you need to know. As a nonprofit executive, you weren't hired, trained, and educated to know all the nuances regarding, you know, techifying your organization. And that's why you're going to the consultant. So you want more than the person that's just going to, you know, true up your email. You want the person that's just going to fix, you know, your laptop, more than the person that's going to fix your laptop and do basic break fix. You're looking for an advisor, no different than the right type of a lawyer, the right type of a financial advisor, the right type of planner. You're looking for that one to help you plan out your technology roadmap and your strategy. I would say that. And if you don't know if you have the right person, talk to some of their other clients, talk to other nonprofits, talk to other intermediaries like M&A or TechSoup or N10 or Tech Impact and others, and find that out.
And two quick follow-ons. One is actually a different way to answer the question. I'm sure a lot of folks don't actually have this type of outside consultant. And within, you know, this group, you have phenomenal purchasing power. So when you're looking at engaging a consultant, and, you know, if there are 4, 5, 6 similarly sized groups, you know, especially on the company side where I represent a lot of these types of providers, they would not be put out by a group of, you know, small to medium-sized nonprofits coming and saying, hey, you know, we all together recognize this risk. You know, we would like to retain you, and that kind of purchasing power can be really appealing and help you, negotiate pricing, negotiate scopes of services that are reasonable. But beyond the consultant, I think a great free resource where incentives are perfectly aligned is going to your insurance broker. And if you do have a data privacy coverage or a general business coverage, ask what those insurance carriers are recommending as far as, you know, third-party platforms or other internal IT management practices, because those carriers have no desire to see you deal with a data breach, right? So they're often pushing out super helpful recommendations around industry best practices and best practices providers, often with partnerships and other discounts. So go to your broker and see if there are good recommendations there that are, you know, really neutral, and again, coming from a place of pretty well aligned incentives.
Great. Thanks, Joe, for that additional response, because I do think that there are often nonprofits that don't have the ability. I mean, they may now look for a consultant. So great advice from, if you've got one in place, how do you make sure that relationship is strengthened? If you don't, what should you be looking for? And if that's not going to be an option, what are additional resources? So thanks. That was a great answer, well-rounded around that. Making a little bit of a pivot kind of back to practical application of things, and maybe slightly self-serving for M&A as well. Any advice or resources that you have, because I do think this is top of mind, especially with the encouragement from you, Melanie, of telling people don't give up on your fundraising opportunities, don't give up on your events. There's lots of resources that are out there. Do any of you have any resources for improving virtual meetings, virtual convenings? Are you seeing any enhancements? So anything that you think can help enhance virtual meetings, virtual gatherings for people, or other additional resources that may have been thought of throughout the presentation.
It's really not my area anymore, but I have seen nonprofits getting very creative with connecting with their stakeholders in these events. Like, they used to have the expenses of paying for dinner and or paying for lunch, and all those expenses of having rental of the space. Some of them are getting creative and sending out like packages for the event, whether they have lunch delivered to all the attendees so everyone gets lunch. Some cocktail events, they send wine, a bottle of wine to all the constituents. I know some are saying they're struggling with sponsorships, so really taking a look at your sponsors and those who typically fund your events, and thinking of creative ways to recognize them. Other than that, I really, and I think hire a professional to moderate your event. Hire someone with the experience who knows what they're doing, and spend a little bit money on that aspect versus the space and the food and all of those other things.
Yeah, this is Leon. The only thing I'll say is you definitely want to be far more surgical and strategic with what you're doing, because you have two things that are happening that kind of are going against each other. You have reality, whereas every industry has just basically been hit hard. And all those organizations that had the resources to fund and sponsor things, their employees might have been furloughed, laid off, let go, budgets exacerbated. They're in the same bad boat that you're in. So you want to be cognizant and conscious of that. As well, you have everybody running to virtual meetings and almost overcompensating. I can't tell you how many virtual meetings where you have this annual conference, but now the annual conference comes into now a weekly 1-hour meeting. And it can be overwhelming when you do that with 19 different organizations, and your calendar is just littered with Google Hangouts and Zoom happy hours. So be strategic, be surgical. Don't just toss it out there. And leverage some of the tools that Melanie and others have mentioned about, but you definitely need to be honest with yourself and say, okay, everybody's got hit hard. How can we broaden our reach? How can we go to the unusual suspects that we may have not gone to in the past, and to tell our story, to get our word out, to get our voice? Because yeah, there's still other people that want to do good, that want to help, but you may have to go about it differently. So I just want to be folks to be mindful of that.
Great, thank you. So kind of in that same spirit, a couple questions have come up around any tips or ideas that you have for taking that whole kind of same concept of enhancing and thinking about strengthening team connections and keeping a positive work culture. Like any advice or tips or resources for enhancing, our individual offices that then, permeate into a team culture when we all have, in the way that we're all working virtually. So any ideas or thoughts on that?
This is Leon again. I mean, I think what we were just talking about, even with the fundraising, is you want to have after 4 o'clock on Fridays, we have team just debrief us. Everybody bring your favorite libations, and we're just going to exhale for the week and all this sort of stuff. But also recognizing that we're all going tremendous stress and burnout. I was just on a call in Michigan, Kalamazoo Community Foundation. they're giving folks like a extra 1 week of vacation and making them take that vacation because you need that time off. You need that time off because we're running on all cylinders, especially in the nonprofit community. We're running on all cylinders because of everything that's happened, with our communities. You have other places that are just taking the day off, and everybody takes a day off, no emails, no phone calls, whatever. The world will be here the next day. But it's to help you mentally get prepared. So as much as we want to find unique ways that we can all get together and we can still hang on to that culture, hang on to that water cooler opportunity where I just walk by your cube and just shoot the breeze with you for a quick minute. We also need to be mindful of giving people some space. Maybe we do a virtual walk around where we all just basically go off our computers and we all just take a walk for, a block or two, and we can come back and talk about it. But maybe we do that in a kind of like you have virtual 5Ks that are now popping up all over the country right now. Finding ways that people can kind of get out and decompress as well.
Others have any thoughts or tips or things you're implementing in your own communities?
I agree with Leon. We just, being a tech firm, obviously we've been extremely busy since COVID. I have not taken a day off this year, and we were told by our CEO this week to take vacation and to, take a break and gather yourself and spend some time with family. Just one thing that we did that was extremely fun is we had someone come in and do a trivia game competition, which was really great for team building. And then you got to work with some other team members that you normally don't work with. And it was a fun experience. It was just an afternoon of trivia. And it wasn't so out of realm that we couldn't answer the questions. It wasn't very complex, but fun and engaging.
Jack, I think, were you mentioning anything?
I
I
think
think you're on mute. Okay. Well, any closing thoughts at all? Any reflections that you might have had throughout the rest of the presentation, or kind of advice or closing thoughts that you have before we come to a conclusion with the webinar? And anybody's burning to share, or have you shared everything? All your secrets, tips?
I would say try not to tackle it all at once. If you're sitting there with a huge list of improvements or things that you want to look into, take a step back and prioritize what's important to your organization and what's going to make the most sense for you. And then just slowly work towards that roadmap and getting those improvements and implementation. Security should, be at the top of everyone's list.
Agree with that. You just really got to chip away slowly and diligently. It's a long list, but it's the old one bite at a time mantra applies here.
Yeah, and I'll just add that we're in a different norm. I want to stop saying new norm. We're in a different norm, whereas we built our whole organization around a single storefront where we operate and we function. Now we're all dispersed into our respective homes. And what does that operation look like when you have now 20, 30 satellite locations that you never had before? And how does that look from a cybersecurity standpoint? How does that look from a network infrastructure standpoint? How does that look from a daily operations? How does that look from an interdepartmental engagement standpoint? When you don't have one.
Yeah, we've had the challenge of having our kind of summer intern associates, people that it's okay now. It says I'm muted, not muted.
We might have a data delay.
That was Jack's final words. Oh, we're going to hear those words 3 minutes later that you just said.
Oh, no. Well, it would be only appropriate, right, on a
Yeah.
webinar on leveraging technology. So fantastic. So with that, I'll come to a close and say thank you so much, Leon, Melanie, Jack, and Joe, for sharing your wisdom, your experiences. This really has been a fantastic and engaging session. I know those that are participating have walked away with a lot of tips and a lot of really great resources. So again, we can't thank you enough. And of course, as there's been several resources shared today, there are certainly more. We tried to fill the chat function with those. The slide deck does have some. There you are, Jack. All right. So the other thing that I just wanted to make a quick mention of is that M&A certainly has, and it's been referenced in the presentation earlier, that we do offer some technology services for nonprofits, and we've got a slide here up here so that you can see that it really, technology, as our presenters have talked about, should really not be a constant hurdle for nonprofits, and many of you will be looking now and into the future for resources, and M&A can certainly be a resource for you. So please reach out if that is something that you are interested in. There is a link there to our technology services. And also we are offering some cybersecurity and offering a service for nonprofits around that. So that might be of interest. And there's other resources as well, but certainly wanted to make sure you were aware that the Michigan Nonprofit Association's tech services are a resource as well. So we'd like to thank everybody for participating and ask again that you continue to help us serve you best. We've put the link into the chat function to complete the evaluation, but also when the webinar closes out, the evaluation will pop up. It only takes a couple minutes and it's invaluable to the planning team as we continue to develop our future sessions and contents. Speaking of future sessions, please note our upcoming topic for next week, which is strategic, supportive, and equity-centered board best practices we need today. The registration for that session is open, and we hope that you will join us again. Thank you again. This concludes the webinar.